This time on Poll Hub, what's up in Georgia and Ohio? Well, our brand new polls of these critical battleground states show some tight races and some not so close ones. We're going to dig in. Then another of our surveys, this one with NPR and the PBS NewsHour, looks at Americans' personal finances in this time of low unemployment and high inflation. We also asked about work, the workplace, labor market. NPR's Stacey Vanek Smith joins to talk about what it all means. Then Lee's Fun Fact travels back in time and then back again. It's about something very current right now, high prices, and as we'll see, Lee is the perfect person to bridge this time gap. Lots to do, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Merinoff.
And we are back in the state. 7 weeks, a little less than 7 weeks to Election Day. And anytime you get midterm elections, the interest is in what's happening in specific states. Sometimes it's a governor's race. Oftentimes it's a Senate race. Occasionally it's even a House race. We are looking at two states that have governors and Senate races, big ones. Ohio and Georgia. Ohio is an opportunity for a Democratic pickup, and Georgia is kind of a must-hold Democratic state. It's an opportunity for the Republicans to flip a seat. So really interesting ones. Let's start with Georgia. Lee, what do you see in our polling from Georgia?
Well, Georgia right now in our latest numbers, of course, the Senate race to which you alluded to, a 5-point edge among registered voters, but only 2 points for Warnock over the Republican Herschel Walker, and in the
2 points. So the 2 points among those who are definitely voting. Right.
Among those definitely voting, and clearly within any kind of statistical margin of error. So this is a very close race in the Senate, and obviously hotly contested and getting all kinds of national attention. And in the governor's race, the incumbent Brian Kemp, looks well on his way to possible reelection here because he's got your basic double-digit advantage over Stacey Abrams. And 4 years ago, this was like a 1 or 2 point contest, and now it is not.
So it's just to be clear, it's double-digit, 11-point lead among those who say they are definitely voting in November's elections. Registered voters, it's a 6-point lead that Kemp has. So
in both cases, as you can see, those who say they're definitely going to vote move in the Republican direction. So if we get to those kind of numbers, both the Senate race becomes very close, but the governor's race widens, but in both ways to the advantage of the Republican candidates. And that's sort of the Georgia lay of the land.
I think what's particularly interesting in Georgia is when we take a look at who's enthusiastic to vote. You point out that if we look at people who are saying that they're definitely going to vote, well, that favors the Republicans. That gets the governor's race much wider and the Senate race very, very tight. Not that it's not tight, among, all groups that we're looking at. But I think in the Democrats' favor, one of the things that we're seeing in this poll as well is that Democrats are more enthusiastic about their candidates and the people that they're supporting. So this is a midterm election. We're looking for things that motivate voters. One of them is the enthusiasm they have for the candidate that they're going to vote for. So, we have, one thing leaning in one direction, Republican, people saying that they're going to turn out for this election, but Democrats being a little bit more enthusiastic about the candidates that they have on the ballot.
But then the other thing that drives excitement and enthusiasm is issues, sometimes anyway. And Barb, I think this is really interesting. We've seen abortion, we've talked about it on this show. Abortion has become a motivating issue for Democrats. And we're not seeing that much in Georgia. The number one issue among registered voters is inflation, 41%. Preserving democracy, 25%, abortion at 14%. Even among Democrats, inflation is 25%, abortion, 25%. Preserving democracy is the number one issue among Democrats at 29%. And even when you look at it as gender thing. So let's reduce it to gender and say, look, women are upset about the abortion ruling. They're registering record numbers in other states. We saw what happened in Kansas. But here in Georgia, the number one issue for women is inflation at 35%, abortion is at 22%. What do you make of that?
Speaks to the fact that in midterm elections, it's about state and local races. So most of the numbers that you cited, Jay, are either national numbers. So when we look at the country as a whole, or they're very specific circumstances that have occurred during the primaries in each individual states, over the last few months. Georgia definitely is a different place. We don't see abortion as a motivating issue for a larger proportion of voters. Now, that's not to say it isn't. I think the fact that abortion is up in double digits and is also for some groups the motivating issue for 1 in 5 voters. That's certainly something that is very, very different in this cycle and something we haven't really seen in previous cycles. So, yes, it is a motivating factor. I think it probably keeps Democrats in the game in Georgia, but it's not the sure thing.
And I think also, I was just going to say, well, when you look at the gender toss-ups on these contests, for example, in Georgia, Stacey Abrams is 9 points up over Brian Kemp among women, but she's trailing among men by 20. And in Ohio, Nan Whaley, the Democrat, is down 8 among women, down 27 among men. So the gender gap is there in both cases, but it doesn't necessarily run up the score in a sufficient number for the female candidates.
So let's talk about Ohio. Similar situation. We have a Senate seat. In this case, it's an open Senate seat. And then we have an incumbent Republican governor who, in our polling, is doing very well. So Mike DeWine is way ahead of Nan Whaley, who you just mentioned. He's up. Mike DeWine is up among registered voters, 55 to 37. And the gap is only slightly narrowed in this case to 55-39 among those definitely voting. The marquee race here, and this is the race that Democrats and Republicans are paying so much attention to, is Rob Portman, senator from Ohio, retiring. He's a Republican, been there a long time. This is an open seat opportunity for Democrats to pick up in Ohio, which maybe used to be a purple state, not so much anymore. Tim Ryan, the Democrat, against J.D. Vance, a fairly prominent Republican, only in that he is a guy who's an author of a book that got a lot of attention, has gotten a lot of love from Peter Thiel and from Donald Trump. Vance, among those definitely saying they're going to vote, up 48-47. Among registered voters, he's up 46-45. In the margin of error, this is a tie, right? What does it say?
It says it's going to be a lot of money going to be spent in Ohio between national dollars.
You want to own a TV station in Ohio? That's the answer. Okay. No, Barb, seriously.
Well, we are seeing some similar patterns as we are seeing in other races and nationally. One being that the enormous gender gap in that particular race. 53% of men support Vance, while 50% of women support Ryan. And we are seeing that it is partially party registration, since women are somewhat more likely to register or identify, in this case in Ohio, because you just register to vote, you don't register in a party, but identify with the Democrats and men identify with the Republicans. But still, I think that's a key indication, something to be watching, particularly when it comes to turnout. And the other thing is independence. What we have seen, for instance, we pointed this out in Georgia, where independents seem to be making up their minds in one direction or another in these state races. But in Ohio, we see a very close contest among independents between Ryan and Vance. Those are two key groups. I think also this one is somewhat more of a national race in the sense that it's tapping into national issues. And I think you point that out pretty clearly, Jay, in terms of the support that Vance has gotten in Republican circles.
Yeah, I would just say on both of these states, Joe Biden is below 40% to the degree that this is a referendum on him, which is traditionally what we look at the midterm election as being in terms of the party out of power. That's not helping the Democrats, but in the congressional generic question and what these candidates are getting, some of them are actually running ahead of Biden, and they need to if the Democrats are going to be successful in either of these states.
One last thing on Ohio, I just point out, because we talked about favorable, unfavorables in Georgia. Tim Ryan, favorable, unfavorable among those definitely voting is 46 favorable, 29% unfavorable. He's a congressman in Ohio, but is not necessarily all that well known. J.D. Vance, who has not campaigned particularly effusively during the summer, and Republicans in Ohio were a little concerned about that. His favorables are upside down among those definitely voting. Favorables 35%, 41% unfavorable. So he's in the lead, or in the statistical dead heat, if we want to use that phrase. But his unfavorables are upside down, and Tim Ryan's are not. So if you're running those campaigns, I think that's a place you want to focus your attention in these final 7 weeks.
Also, and for both of these candidates, about a third of voters say they're really unsure, don't know how to rate them. So this is going to be one intense campaign, not just dollars, Lee, but I'm not sure people are going to be wanting to pay too much attention to all of the ads that are going to be going back and forth. I suspect it's going to get pretty nasty as each one decides to define the other.
Well, kitchen table issues have historically been a voting issue. And of course, that includes the economy and personal finances. So, with our national polling partners, NPR and the PBS NewsHour, we wanted to get a sense of how Americans are feeling financially and to see not just how they're doing with their personal finances, but tied into that with how things are going within the workforce and labor. So joining us today is Stacey Vanek Smith. Stacey is the global economics correspondent for NPR to break down the latest NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll. Hey, Stacey.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure. So I just want to take a second to go through a couple of quick hits in terms of our numbers. So among Americans, 37% say that their family finances have gotten worse over the past year. And that's an 8-point jump since February. Nearly 3 in 4 Americans, 72%, have had to cut back on at least one necessity or nicety. And when we look at the labor force, 38% of Americans who work for pay have changed jobs in the last 2 years, many of which citing better pay and opportunity as the leading reasons for making that change. But we are seeing that more than 6 in 10 adult workers have received an increase in pay over the last year. So, Stacey, draw a circle around this for us. What is the financial picture for Americans looking like these days?
It's like a weird collection of things, right? It doesn't all make sense. You see most Americans, 6 out of 10, that's huge, right? I mean, that's almost like 3/4 of Americans saying that they got a raise, which seems great. But then we're seeing more people struggling financially, more people, saying that their financial situation is worse, has gotten worse, that they're struggling to pay bills, things like that. So, I mean, that's really interesting. I think what we're seeing here from the people that I talked to that had agreed to speak to press after the poll, after the excellent data that you guys got, people said, yes, I got a raise. It wasn't enough to keep up with prices. So I think that's what's going on. I mean, you have a really hot job market. So people are in a really good position to ask for raises, right? A lot of people are hiring. I think there are almost 2 open positions for every worker right now. So workers do have leverage, maybe more leverage than they've had in the last 50 years. But it's a strange climate too. Prices are rising. And I think in a lot of cases, the prices are rising faster than wages. So people have more money, but they're not able to buy as much stuff with it. Economists actually have a name for this. It's called the money illusion, which I really love that name because it's like the numbers on your paycheck look bigger, but that is an illusion because the paycheck buys less. So I think that's part of what we're seeing.
Is that something, Stacey, that is kind of, stabilizing? I mean, we had a very, strong inflationary period, particularly with regard to supply chains and energy prices earlier in the year. Some of that seems to have stabilized, but the perception of inflation certainly has not. In fact, we see it as the number one issue for many, many voters who are thinking about the midterm elections. Have we hit the worst of it, or is there still more to come?
Well, there are definitely some really positive signs. For instance, gas prices getting lower. I think that is huge, right? Gas goes into everything, delivery, services. Pretty much everybody uses oil and gas. So when the price of oil gets so high, the price of gas gets so high, as we saw earlier this year, then I think it's almost impossible for prices not to rise. That has come under control somewhat. Inflation is kind of sticking around stubbornly. It's lower here than it is in most of Europe. But I do think, I mean, it's interesting that you say perception because inflation is this tricky thing. A lot of it is perception. I mean, part of what causes an inflationary spiral is people thinking that there is an inflationary spiral. It gets a little trippy, honestly. But
Sure. We
what
feed on
happens
each
is-
other.
yeah, I mean, and it's like, let's say you own a restaurant and prices have been rising, and they seem to be stabilizing, but you have to print menus and you can only do that every few months. So you're like, well, I'm just going to add in what I think inflation is going to be and a little extra. Or when workers go to ask for a raise, they're like, well, I'm going to maybe instead of asking for 5%, like I might have done, I'm going to ask for 12%. So suddenly that gives inflation a lot of momentum that it might not have in the sort of the practical economy. There might not be a practical reason for the inflation, but there is this the expectations play a powerful role.
I'd like to zero in, Stacey, on the battery that we asked pertaining to how Americans are making ends meet. We asked a bunch of different questions about, whether or not they're cutting back on certain areas or skipping out on certain payments. And not in all cases, but in some, there are economic disparities based on income level. Was there one area that really struck you or surprised you, or one said, wow, this is really a pinch for Americans?
I mean, as far as like the individuals that I talked to from the poll, or as far as kind of digging into the data a bit?
Both.
Either way.
Well, the second you asked that question, my mind went to this woman who you guys had spoken with to get data. And then I also spoke with her. Her name's Donna Dunn. She lives in Booker, Texas. She is 49. She is the mother of 5 kids. So she is on a super tight budget. She works
Whoa.
full time. She's an office manager at a health clinic. And she was amazing. She was basically like the CPI. She was rattling off the prices of things, exactly how much they'd risen: eggs, ground beef, hot pockets, everything. She was amazing. And so what she had done, and I heard this pretty universally, no more family trips. That was a big one because of gas. That saves on gas and hotels. Also, the food prices, she changed what her family ate. So no more beef, they'd switched to pork. No more deli sandwiches. She has 3 teenagers. So, and apparently they just eat an enormous amount of food logistically. So she said, no more deli sandwiches, a lot of PB&J. She said they do not go out to eat at all ever. But still, she is just clearly so on it. She's an office manager. She loves numbers, so sharp, so all over it. But even still, she said, listen, I have a dentist bill I haven't paid. She's like, I just stretched my budget as tight as I can. She went to her employer. She works at a health clinic, and asked for an inflation raise. And she did get one, but she said the prices just outpaced it. Her family food bill had gone from $700 a month to $1,600 a month.
Ooh,
Wow.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think and so she was cutting back what she ate, vacations. Another thing that I actually found very delightful was she lives in Booker, Texas is quite rural. So they've started a swapping system. So her neighbor has chickens and trades her eggs for the vegetables that she grows. Which, like a trade economy,
Yeah.
that does get around inflation. That can get around inflation.
Yeah, and it's so different, the life experiences that we have depending upon where we live. I was particularly struck when we're looking at raises and people who are working for pay, employed, and who's getting them and who's not. It really is quite striking. And so, a couple of things, we do see income differences, we see education differences, we see age differences, we see gender differences. And it's all what you expect if you have a lower income, if you have less education. Actually, if you're older and if you're female, you're all of those characteristics, you're less likely to have gotten farther ahead this year. So
Yeah.
how does that play out? I mean, if you're in a rural area, yeah, you can barter because people have gardens, they're able to keep farm animals. But for many folks, that's not an option.
Well, I think the data showed a lot of people were cutting back on going out to eat. That was a big one, a universal one. Also cutting back on trips. That was something I heard from everybody I spoke with. Not that they weren't going on trips at all, but just way fewer. And that to me, because I've been covering business and economics so long, that worries me because that is the kind of thing that really has a ripple effect, right? That affects hotels and gas stations and, tour groups and all the whole services economy can really get affected when people start to cut back like that. But it's a really obvious place to cut back. I live in New York. I have totally noticed prices going up, and I have very consciously tried to stop eating out as much. I mean, eating out was always one of my favorite things to do. It's very fun in New York. It's, all of our apartments are so tiny and dirty that when you meet up with people, you usually do go out. Now we're just going to the park, things like that, instead of going out to eat. So I think that is a big one. And also what you said really struck me too, because it was so striking in the data, the generational element. as far as people who are likely to have switched jobs and people who are likely to have gotten raises, it was younger workers in both cases. And I think those two things are related because I think the top reason people gave, particularly men, for switching jobs was more money. And a greater share of younger workers were switching jobs than older workers. So I think that might be part of the extra money too. Younger workers tend to be more flexible. They will often have like fewer family obligations. Also, it's earlier in their career. Sometimes at a more junior level, there are more options open. And also, there's very clearly, I think, a different attitude towards work that is kind of developing culturally. And it does seem to be kind of divided along generational lines, although that is not backed by data. That is like my own thoughts. So
Great.
take it with a grain of salt.
Well, but also we have seen a lot of transitions, not just generationally, but certainly because of the pandemic. As you point out, 55% of folks who changed jobs did so for pay or better opportunity. But then if you think about the opposing number, which is close to the other half, they were changing for other reasons, because they relocated or because they wanted more flexible hours. And certainly, traditionally, people who are younger tend to change jobs much more easily than older workers. But I think probably the pandemic exacerbated, some of those things as well. Do you see some of the changes that in work that we saw during the pandemic? Do you think those things are long lasting?
That's a really, really interesting question to me. I think as far as the job hopping, that is a little dependent. I think that could go away because if the job market tightens up, if there are fewer jobs available and unemployment goes up, I think the job jumping will stop pretty fast. However, I think some of the other things are really here to stay. I think the pandemic really made a lot of Americans kind of rethink the place of work in their lives. And I think, and working from home, remote work, a lot of moving, I think a lot of that is kind of reflected in that is a little squishier to get at with data. But I do think that is probably here to stay. I don't think that mindset's going to change. I mean, as far as job jumping, if there's no job to jump to, it's much harder. And I think, so many people are quitting, not the quiet quitting, but the actual quitting, millions of people every month. But I think you're probably a lot less likely to quit if you're not sure you can get another job. So those things I think could change fairly quickly if our economy gets worse. But like a lot of the remote work things, what people are prioritizing, I think we're going to see that stick around. I really do.
Stacey, has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Stacey Vanek Smith, Global Economics Correspondent for NPR. We hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Okay, so in May of 1951, I was born, and in June of 1951, the Gallup organization decided to ask people what annoyed them about kind of like prices and different issues of, cost of living concerns. And wow, in 1951, 60% said cost of meat, 13% said, well, kind of like groceries generally, and not much else got much of anything else. So it was meat.
Like
meat,
coffee. Coffee was number 3. People were concerned that coffee must have been really expensive in
I
1951.
guess so,
right?
but and you don't want to have it with a steak for sure. And those, and then we fast forward now 70, I don't know how many years, 71 years, and we asked in this summer a very similar question. We found out, drum roll, what's the biggest concern? Gasoline prices, and then grocery at 58%, groceries at 20, meat, the big winner in 1951 at 4%, which I'm not sure what to make of, other than the fact that it's just gas, energy, and that seems to be what the dominant concern has been.
If we had asked at a different time, like say we had asked during the midst of like a big debate on health insurance or something, I wonder if that would have been on there.
Yeah,
Because I don't think when you think about things you buy, you don't think about things like that, like your mortgage costs or your health.
Yeah.
But those are some of the biggest drivers of inflation and family budgets. The other thing is what you couldn't get in 1951, the cable bill.
yeah.
Right?
You think, yeah, the
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking that in all of this, people are being driven by kind of like not discretionary expenditures, but it seems to be the things they can live with or live without, and gas and meat for the different eras may fall more in that kind of your mortgage and your health care, and I don't know, maybe those
Yeah.
things are more
I don't know.
more.
I mean, I think groceries also was something that was pretty top of mind for many Americans,
Yeah.
and is certainly comparable over these 70 years. And I wonder if we just kind of think of things differently in terms of what it is we are also consuming. And I mean, it's not a surprise to know that in terms of consuming meat and all sorts of different meats, that has declined over the last 70 years and is not as much of a staple in most American households as it was back in the 1950s. Perhaps I'm surprised chicken didn't make our list, but it didn't.
But maybe also the availability of fast foods now. Also, when people think meat, they're not necessarily thinking, massive filet mignon. They may be thinking a burger at a fast food place, and it's very accessible and isn't going to break the bank.
Yeah, I would think filet mignon is not on the top of everybody's list, but perhaps an Arby's is.
Lee, since you were alone in being on this podcast and alive in 1951, what do you think the current price of gas was in 1951 in 1951 dollars? I have it up. That's why I just pulled it up and I figured it would be a fun way to end.
I'm going 39.9 a gallon.
27 cents a gallon.
Ooh.
Yeah. No wonder people.
I thought you meant yes, high test.
No. In today's dollars, that's about $2 a gallon. So it's actually,
Okay.
that's a lot less than what we pay right now. But we were down to $2 a gallon not all that long ago. So yeah. Anyway.
Well,
Interesting.
Think of the quality of life. I don't think folks were commuting as much or driving as much. I mean, like the family road trip was a big deal in the summers.
Yeah, there's no interstate.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Back in 1951, the family road trip was a big deal, and I think that to your point, I think it is the way that people are experiencing life and experiencing expenditures. And Jay, I also agree with you that mortgage is a big deal, but it's not in your face. When you're standing by the pump and you're seeing the numbers change, you're like, oh, I wasn't paying $60 to fill my tank, a year or two ago. It hurts.
So you got 3 kids, you have a family. What would be number 1 on your list? Now this poll was in June. So to be fair, gas prices have come down, but we're in September. What would be on the top of your list?
I admit groceries. It kills me to see how much we spend in groceries and how much we spend on specific items, but I will leave it at that.
Oh,
how about horses and dogs? How about horses and dogs, Barb? Expensive?
Yeah, well, I think food for any living creature has gotten a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And Lee, is it gas for you? Or is it Yankees tickets?
No, I think it's my credit card.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, but
I should look up Yankees tickets in 1951 because I bet those have outpaced gas in terms of inflation.
I would say definitely. I'm remembering when I was a kid, I believe the box seats were $3.50 and the reserve seats were $2.75. Those are as in $3.50 and $2.75. $3.50 now means something entirely different, and you don't necessarily get a good seat.
$3.50 is out in the bleachers, right? Now,
I'm not sure what they are, but the tickets.
no, you're not getting into Yankee Stadium, which the bleachers actually aren't in the stadium either. But you're not getting in the stadium for $3.50. I don't even think you can get a soda.
No,
definitely not. Definitely not.
Anyway,
And certainly not a
Yankee
ballpark,
Stadium.
Frank.
Particularly at Yankee Stadium. Other stadiums, not necessarily as bad. When you get out of the New York area, it drops a little bit.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as we release it.
We'll see you next time.